Good morning. We'll call the Committee of the Whole meeting to order for May 22, 2024. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Mr. Barnes. Mrs. Burdick? Here. Mr. Curran?
Here.
Mr. Sear? Mr. Demick?
Here.
Mr. Fanton?
Here.
Mrs. Hanchett?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Havey? Mr. Healy?
Here.
Mr. Rickey?
Here.
Mrs. Ricketts Swales?
Here.
Mrs. Root? Mr. Rumfelt?
Here.
Mr. Stockin? Currently 12 members present, 3 absent.
Thank you. So one agenda item today, although I think we do have a personnel matter that needs to be addressed towards the end of the meeting that'll have to be an executive session. We'll put that under unfinished business. So primarily we're here to discuss the county's redistricting plan. It's a follow-up from the public hearing we had last night. To my knowledge, we have not received any written or email correspondence from the public. Is that correct, County Administrator? Okay. So I guess the purpose today is to get to a point where we can, this afternoon, introduce a local law with a specific plan in mind and set pass a resolution setting a date for the next public hearing with that specific local law. So what we've just got to do is we got to hammer this out hopefully for the last time, get a map, get consensus or as close as we can on a map, and give administration direction to prepare that local law. So if you could, Brenda, pull up that PowerPoint. We're not going over any ancient history. We all understand the rules of the game and all that, but really at this point, unless there's any objection, we're down to 3 viable maps. And if I may ask Mr. Abdullah to join us at the front again, he's just going to, because it's been a little while since we talked about these maps, he's going to give us an overview on these 3 maps, explain their pluses and minuses, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Welcome back. Thank you.
Okay. So option 1 is up on the screen, and I think you all have paper copies as well. And yes, has been discussed. If things had been left the same, you had about a 12% population deviation. So we did need to make some adjustments for the new redistricting. So option 1 was going, and I shall say that after the new census, District 1, had the largest population, and District 4 had the smallest, and so that's kind of driving the adjustments that you see. So in option 1, Granger would move from District 1 to District 5, and then West Almond would move from District 5 to District 4, and Ward would move from District 2 to District 4. And that would produce a population deviation of 4.91%.
So, remind me, is this between planning and your analysis? This really was the only map that could be devised that would get us within the 5%?
Yes, that was. Okay. It was the only map where we were maintaining towns as undivided towns, which is, considered a plus and preferable if at all possible. And, after discussion of option 1 at an earlier meeting, I guess the biggest concern that came up was understanding that the population had to be addressed, the equality of population. West Almond, of all of the changes, seemed to have the least connection potentially with its new district. And part of that, I think, was geography. Part of it's just the road system and other things. And so after option 1 was reviewed, we did come up with a couple of alternatives, options 5 and 6, that tried to address that West Almond situation. And in option 5, it's the same as option 1, except that now, instead of being part of District 4, West Almond would be part of District 1. And that would tie it with Angelica and its neighboring town on I-86. And it's my understanding they do share some activities, or potentially do, as far as fire service and other things. In the scenario of West Almond being in District 1 instead of District 4, the population deviation is 5.86%.
Okay.
And then option 6, everything's the same as option 1, except that in this case, West Almond stays in District 5. And so you end up with just 2 towns being moved, Granger and Ward, instead of 3. And in that scenario, the population deviation is 7.08%. $7.08.
Okay. It's all coming back to me now.
All right.
All right, any questions on the maps? Thoughts? Mr. Healy?
Okay. Well, I got a couple thoughts here. One is a legislator representing District 2, and also as the Republican Party chairman for the county. I have a couple of questions here. Number one, I don't understand, well, I haven't understood this entire process to begin with, but District 2 population has stayed roughly the same for the last 30 years anyways. So I don't understand why we're losing a town that's been historically in our district to make the fix. That's number one. Number two, I expect the population trends to continue as they have for the last, since I've been on the board, 14 years, I think it is, almost 14 years. And that's where District 1 grows, and District 4 shrinks, the southern part of the county overall. District 3 has been holding their own, basically, too. So, you know, taking into consideration the future, the projection, I think my district's going to lose population because of the Cuba cheese fiasco, where we lost that. I know some of the older guys that were eligible for retirement have decided to retire because they don't like to drive. And I don't think none of the next generation will come from my district, District 2. However, there will be, I'm sure, some people from District 1 or people moving into District 1 that want to work at the plant because it's so close to to those towns in the northern part. And it's also closer to our major population areas, which our younger people seem to enjoy being closer to Rochester and Buffalo, etc. So I don't understand the whole process. Don't understand why District 2 is taking it on the nose. I don't know why West Alman is taking it on the nose, or if they go in with under option 1, they'll have more, and all the smaller towns in that district will have more say under option 1. Under any of the other options, they'll have less say and politically within the county. So I'm against. This appears to be most of this whole process appears to be gerrymandering to me, and I'm already identified myself as my position, and I'm not for gerrymandering in any way, shape, or form. I'm for doing everything up front and honest and forthright. So.
Well, my response to that would be that it's all driven by the math, and also the problem of the statute saying that towns only over 40% of a ratio and villages can be divided. And so that means that the only towns that could be divided would be Wellsville and Andover. And so the population changes are what they are, and you have to work off of 2020. What you might speculate the population will be in the future, I will say, is irrelevant to this exercise. That waits for the next census, and then you can redistrict at that time. But this is all about the 2020 census, and your duty and obligation is to build a plan off of the 2020 census. So I think as Keir drew the maps, and I took a crack at it myself, the population drove it. And you end up with just, in this case, either only 3 or 2 towns moving, and I think that's out of 29 towns. That's pretty good. And the map does not change substantially. So it just is the case that, Ward, West Alman, and Granger were the ones in play to have the least disruption, the fewest number of towns move, and not divide municipalities.
Well, I understand that, and I appreciate all the efforts that went into this, but obviously my district wasn't represented in any of the work sessions either. We were left out of that, which whole entire process, so I had, like I said, I think maybe there were some other solutions that weren't looked at. I'm not for dividing any towns or dividing any villages or anything crazy like that. And therefore, I am willing to support option 1 just because it's the most fair and it probably will meet the needs going forward, so we don't have to address these effects again in 10 years. Thank you.
Let me make a point of clarification here for anybody listening at home. The census numbers were provided to every board member many months ago, probably over a year ago at this point, and the board members were asked to play with them just as administration. I don't mean to diminish it by saying play, but it takes a lot of pushing towns around and doing pluses and minuses to determine what is legally permissible. We do have a great benefit here in Mr. Abdallah, he has really no dog in this fight whatsoever. I'm a little surprised to hear the G word, gerrymandering. I don't see any indication of that whatsoever. We've had even the maps that were provided, we were provided with 6 different options from the sublime to the ridiculous, and we've had multiple full board committees of the whole meetings to discuss this to get to the point we are now. So I feel very comfortable that this has been an open and transparent process, and that gerrymandering certainly has nothing to do with how we got to where we are at this point. Gary, then Gretchen.
Yes, could you Could you review the 5% and up to 10%, what the rules are?
Sure. So in 2021, the state legislature did modify the statute and required that reapportionment plans with single-member districts would now have to meet a 5% maximum population deviation threshold. When I look back at the legislative history and the debate in the state legislature leading up to adoption of that rule, the initial legislation actually proposed no more than a 4% deviation. And that would have applied to both single-member districts plans and multi-member district plans. And they had debate, but when the smoke cleared and new bills were adopted, they went with a number 5, and they applied that only to single-member districts and left the language the same in the statute for multi-member districts. And the language in the statute for multi-member districts essentially says it needs to have a reasonable attempt has to be made to keep the deviation low. But they decided not to impose 4 or 5% on a multi-member district plan. Now, before 2021, and it's still the law of the United States, the U.S. Supreme Court rulings state that it's acceptable to have up to a 10% deviation and be within constitutional limits. So based on New York State Legislature's decision not to apply a 5% rule to multi-member districts, I would say that the 10% rule is ultimately what's still in effect for multi-member districts. However, my concern has been that the state has signaled that they prefer something more constraining than 10%. They adopted 5% for single member. They didn't make that a requirement for multi-member, but my recommendation has been it's best to try to see if you can get as close to 5 as possible, even in a multi-member. And that will make it pass muster. But one other comment I want to make is that, the equality of population, it is the #1 priority. But it's not a matter of these criteria are mutually exclusive or that you have to meet #1 and then you throw out the rest of them. So I think equality of population is the first priority. In the case of multi-member, you definitely need to keep it under 10. Try to get close to 5 if you can. But you don't ignore the rest of the criteria. So community of interest, political party representation, the minority representation issue, all of those are still in play. Even as you decide, well, in the case of option 1, 4.91, obviously that's under 5. So you meet a single member standard in that one. Option 5, 5.86, just slightly above 5. And I'll just mention I've done the math on that one. The option 5's population deviation between its largest and smallest districts is 545 persons. In other words, the largest district is 545 people larger than the smallest in option 5. In option 1, it's a 456 person deviation. So it's only 89 people difference between the largest and the smallest, between option 5 and option 1. So that it's a very modest difference. So, if there are community of interest reasons to have West Almond be in District 1, I think it's acceptable to do so, and that a 5.86% deviation in a multi-member district that's very close to 5, I think that's certainly acceptable. As for option 6, even it could be considered, but I think a showing would need to be made, that West Almond really has the strongest community of interest and really strongly belongs in District 5, so much so that it, as compared to District 1, that it outweighs that percentage difference. I mean, because you jump to 7.08 in option 6. So I think you'd want to be able to articulate on the record, why West Almond shouldn't be in District 1 and really belongs in District 5.
Gretchen.
Thank you for all your work that you've done on it. I've always, from the beginning, been a component for option 1. It was the closest. It made sense to me. I can understand the other options and their advantages or disadvantages, depending on how you're looking at it. But and I'm in District 2, and when we went to the town of Ward to get their opinion, to explain about it, and then they tended to lean towards option 1, and I feel like we're here to kind of represent that. They're the ones that are being affected, although we do need to look at the bigger picture too. So that's my input.
Thank you. Mr. Healy.
Yes. Well, looking at the other option there, you're talking about communities of interest. You're saying the community of West Almond doesn't have anything in common with the town of Ward or town of Andover or even the bigger town of Wellsville? Is that what you're saying by?
So I'm going to cut you off there. I'll say that Mr. Abdallah is not as familiar with these communities as we are, which is, again, a benefit of the work he's done. He's focusing on the numbers, and he's taking feedback from this board on what is or isn't communities of interest. So probably better to have that conversation within the members of this board. I don't think it would be fair to ask Mr. Abdallah to speculate on whether or not the town of West Almond is a community of interest with the town of Andover.
So nobody's educated him on any of those community of interest?
It's our job to make the decision. It's his job to provide us with the legal expertise and what's permissible for this board to do or not do. It's our job to do the subjective part of this
Thank
work.
you.
Mr. Havey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In looking at all three options and going back and forth and analyzing the data, I'm going to stick with option 5, and I'll tell you why. It makes the most sense to me applying common sense to the three options given. This keeps us at a low percentage rate of 5.86. We don't go up into the 7s. If we went with option 1, that would only take us slightly under 5. And I think option 5 makes more sense all around. So common sense-wise, option 5. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stocking.
I just want to, the very first day we got this information and the maps, the very first day I played with numbers myself and almost hit option 1 right on the nose. So I don't think anybody's doing anything outside crazy stuff. Just the numbers, it was right there way back before we ever discussed it here.
Mr. Havey.
Playing off Mr. Stockton's comment, I did the same thing, and I came up with the same scenario that you did. I took a map of Allegheny County, I took a marker, and I made some marks, and I came up with something that looked almost identical to option 1 at that time. So, yeah, good work.
I would just say that I feel very good knowing that Mr. Havey agreed with something that I did. So.
Don't get used to it.
Mr. Demick.
Yeah, I agree with the option 5. I appreciate Mr. Odell's work. I've looked at a lot of it, talked to a lot of people. I'm a District 1 legislator, also vice chair of the Republican Party, and I have spoken with several people from West Elm. That's the key place. We also went and met with the town of Granger. That's an unhappy town. But if you do the math, which has been done, it makes sense. But West Elm, my question to them was, with several people, including their Republican committee people, is if you had to not be in District 5 that you've been in, where would you rather be? And every one of them has said to me, District 1. I know that Mr. Healy has a problem with us getting any more people in District 1, but, I mean, it makes sense. And using that J word thrown out there, I'm just appalled from that, but that's my feeling on it.
Mr. Rumpfelt.
I just like to reiterate, we've been working on this for months. Like you said, you gave us the stuff to play with or to try to figure out our thing. We've had many meetings on it, open in the public. So I don't know where we haven't had a chance to talk about this before, because we have. I was leaning towards District 5, or for option 5, but now I'm kind of on the fence with 1 and 5 because of the rate, the percentage. But I just like to say we've been working on this for months, and this just comes up now.
So I'll put on my District 5 hat very quickly. As a District 5 legislator, my preference would be to keep West Almond where it is. Yeah, I think District 5 and District 1 have about an equal claim as far as communities of interest go. And I see a benefit to moving one less town. If you can avoid moving a town, you should probably investigate it. In reality, if we're doing what's right and what's best for the county, I think that option 6, just because you're starting to push the envelope a little bit in terms of the population, it's just really probably not the appropriate thing to do. If we are striving to get as close to 5% as possible, I think you probably discount option 6. But I know my fellow legislators in District 5 would agree with me. We're sad to lose West Almond. We have a lot of Alpha Almond District is in West Almond. You mentioned fire service. A lot of West Almond is serviced by that side of the county. But if we're doing what's best for the county, which I think is what all of us are striving to do here, I think you probably discount option 6. So that was kind of a precursor to seeing if we can make some progress here this morning. And is there anybody here that wants to advocate for option 6, or can we put it in the bin? Okay, good. So goodbye to option 6. All right, we've got it whittled down to 2. So of those 2, does anyone else want to make further comment or argument on one side or the other? If not, what we're going to start doing is we're going to start asking for motions directing administration to draft the local law one way or the other, and we'll see if we've got the votes.
Can I just make a comment?
Yep.
Personally, I think West Almond has really no connection with Andover and Wellsville. So I really think putting them in District 1 makes much more sense. You're at the 5.86, but that's pretty close. I don't think we're going to get in trouble with 5.86. And I just think that makes the most sense.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion for to do option 5.
Okay, so that's a motion. Make sure I'm getting this right here, Allison. We're getting a motion to direct administration to prepare a local law for this afternoon's meeting that would reapportion the county legislative districts as indicated in what's called option 5 in front of us. Is that a motion? And that's good. That's good, Allison. And we need a second, and then we can have more discussion. Okay, Gary had the most enthusiastic hand raised, so he's the second. And now it's open for discussion. Jan?
Brooke, if we still have 2 more public hearings about this. The public hearing now will be just on option 5, because that's what the local law is saying?
I think it's fair to say that it could be open to discussion on redistricting in general.
It would be strictly on the map that would be option 5. It would be specifically on that local, on
So if
that
I'm a
map.
member of the public and I am opposed to option 5,
You would-
I
you-
prefer option 1, I could come up to the podium and say, I'm opposed to this legislation and would prefer to see the board enact this legislation. Is that not permissible?
That would be, they would say, yes, they could say that I am opposed to this local law, that I preferred the proposed map that you had for this redistricting. They can say that, but they have to speak directly to the local law that would be laid on the table that you are speaking about at the public hearing.
Okay. And that's the reason why we held the public hearing last night, is because we wanted more flexibility, and we wanted public input prior to making the decision we're making today. But we're certainly able to receive public comment and obligated to receive public comment once the local law is introduced and the public hearing is set.
Correct, but it has to be specifically on the local law and the contents of that local law. So whatever map that you choose, it has to be there for it or against it,
Yeah.
and then the reasons why.
And if we get sufficient public outcry, we could vote it down and reintroduce or introduce a new local law.
We start the process all over the local law, yes.
Okay. We on the same page there?
Well, so I guess, I thought that was the case. So I guess what I'm asking then is, are we jumping the gun adopting option 5 until all of our public hearings are done?
We have to
Because we're on
only
a
be-
time frame, right?
Well,
So you are going to have to, you are required under the process of adopting a local law to hold a public hearing on the local law, regardless of how many prior public hearings, informal, not required public hearings you hold about these proposed map options. I don't know how many more public hearings or public comment periods you can go out to the community and solicit input from. And we do have to keep in mind that this is subject to a permissive referendum. So there is a 45-day, is it 45 days? Or I think it's 45. So there's 45 days after the local law is passed where someone, if people wanted to challenge this, they can circulate petitions. There's a whole process that it can be done before it can go into effect. And this local law we have to go through the permissive referendum period, and we have to have this local law adopted and done before we start circulating petitions in February of 2025. So we've got to be careful. We have to be careful with this time frame, and we have to make sure that we have this done, because otherwise we're going to be forced. We're not going to be able to do the redistricting, and we're going to be forced to go to other options which you may not like, such as doing weighted voting for the remainder of the term until we have the ability to do redistricting again.
okay, thank you. John, you got something, and then Dwight?
Yes, I thought we were going to talk before we made a motion. You said they're going to talk.
Yeah, that's
So we
fine.
I agree with Jan on the part that West Almond probably doesn't have much in common with Wellsville, but what does Ward have in common with them? And our people at Ward have always been happy, at least they tell us in the meetings we go to every year, that we represent them well from District 1. And they asked if they had to go to Wellsville, Andover, they wanted Almond to go with them, because at least they'd have someone, another town the same size as them, that maybe it would help getting a voice instead of getting swallowed up with the big boys. So that's why I'm going to be voting option 1.
So, yeah, Dwight, go ahead.
Yeah, District 3 is not being affected by this, but I hear the constituents' discussion about option 5. I was leaning toward option 1, but it sounds like option 5 is more palatable to some of our representatives, so I can certainly support option 5 if that's where we go.
Thank you.
Mr. Harris.
Mr. Rumfeld and Mr. Healy.
So The reason I was all for option 5 at first until talking to people from Ward, and that was the same thing. They said, well, we have more in common with West Elman, and they wanted West Elman to join them. And that's talking to them. And if we go by who has more in common, well, then the southern half of Alfred, whose school district is in Andover, has more in common with Andover than, and Andover really doesn't have a lot in common with Wellsville. So you can't go by who has more in common, more what. It's more of the population thing. But like I said, I was leaning option 5 until we got people from Ward reached out and they don't want to go alone. So.
Thank you. Mr. Healy?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So, excuse me for my temperament there when I mentioned gerrymandering, but it brings up how option 5 even came up to being, because that wasn't one of the original ones, and all of a sudden option 5 appeared one day, and with all the other discussions. So somebody brought in, certainly I wasn't consulted, and like I said, District 2 did not have any representation in that whole entire process, other than the conversations, and obviously quite often that's after decisions have already been made and other maps popped in. But I think there again, West Alman has more in common with Ward, probably even Andover, and parts of Wellsville. If we wanted to get down to, and I think that would address, it's the most fair by the book, the most fair and transparent by the book. It was proposed to us to begin with, and it is also, I think, will take care of our needs going forward, so we don't have to readdress this problem.
Thank you. Mr. Healy, fortunately, I remember how option 5 came to be. When option 1 was floated to this board, the full board, there was concern expressed by multiple members of this board that West Almond was not a community of interest with Wellsville and Andover. So Mr. Abdallah went back to the drawing board and came up with option 5, which satisfies legal requirements and addresses what this board says was a concern, that West Almond was not a good fit with District 4. If anyone has a different memory than that?
I think, Mr. Chairman, you are correct in that, but I think we might have missed the step that we didn't communicate that back to the board. I'm not sure we actually came back in a meeting such as this and told them that Mr. Abdallah was able to address those concerns by coming up with that map. But you are correct, that map, it did come as a result of that meeting.
And I understand that just everybody, especially the A team's been very busy. I understand that. I'm working digitally and shorthanded, and I understand that, and I appreciate everybody's efforts. But there again, the one by the book, the original one was option 1. I'm going to go with that. It seems fair, clean cut, and no politics involved.
Mr. Abdallah.
I'll just mention, I mean, I'm the lucky one because I'm only focused on this. I'm not focused on all of other Allegheny County's issues. But it was at the November 15 meeting when the first PowerPoint was done, and we had option 1 through 4 at that point, and that was where the several legislators brought up their concern about West Almond. So it was after that that I then drew 5 and I think 6 as well, even though 6 was kind of out there. And then back on, it was brought back to this board in a second PowerPoint on January 24th to go over the new additional options of 5 and 6.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Dunn.
I would like to address the having in common issue. I've been around the municipal world for many years, and I know who has in common and works together. And probably if that's the case, we have to look at Ward and SIO do more together than they do with anyone else. As far as West Elmond goes, you can include Birdsall, Elmond Big Time, Angelica. They all work together. They do things together. So as far as having the same in common, I don't understand Ward's issue. Their point is both of these have Ward in the same place. So, I mean, that's just my thought on that part of it.
Thank you. Ms. Burdick?
I think maybe what we're forgetting is that this does not change anything as far as them working together, the school districts, what school they go to, where they go grocery. It does not change any of that. It only changes who their legislative representatives will be and possibly their voting district, correct? Doesn't even affect their
Like
voting.
their polling place?
Right,
No.
no, it doesn't affect that either. So really, it's only affecting one thing. So whether they have it in common or not, they still can do all that.
Mr. Chairman, I do want to apologize. Mr. Abdullah was correct. I did go back and look. I'd forgotten we had that November meeting, and that was the comments after those meetings. But yes, we did all consider that in the January Committee of the Whole, I believe.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think if I could just, the crux of the problem is it's really difficult to be in the middle of the map. You know, these towns in the middle have small populations, and the need to keep contiguous boundaries means they're always going to be going to other districts one way or another. So I think if you look at the history of towns shifting, it's more towards the middle. And without doing something drastic, which is what the board told us not to do, I don't see how you can look at some of these other issues.
Yeah, and it was mentioned last night. It should probably be mentioned again. This is not an initiative this board chose to undertake because we just want to. This is something that we're required to do, and if we had our druthers, we wouldn't be doing it at all. And we do sympathize with Granger and Ward and West Almond, and you know, in years past, it was at the town of Allen has suffered the same fate, and it's not. We're not taking any pleasure in this. It's what we're trying to do is just do it in a way that harms the least. And I hope the public understands that. Dwight?
Yeah, last night's meeting, we had one representative that, and the only one that expressed an interest, and her interest was in option 5. So we heard from the public, and only one.
And she was a resident of District 2.
Yeah.
And I did talk to her this morning and wanted to understand why she was that way. And she said she had thought that the election board wanted that, and she understood, and I told her where we were coming from on that too. So it wasn't wholeheartedly just on that, but she did come. But I was curious why she was, as what I would represent her too. So I did call her this morning.
And originally, Mr. Reynolds told me, the election board, our commissioner for us, that he wanted option 1. And then something happened. Somebody talked to him, and got him to change his opinion there. So,
Well, I think we all wanted option 1 to begin with, but expressed concern and got another option. So it's not a bad thing to change. You know, I mean, it's not, people are allowed to change their minds, I believe. You know, if there's something better to look at.
I'm not saying if it's done for the right reasons, you know, positive change is a good thing. People have other motives than this. It's not, and I'll leave that up to the public to say.
Well, once again, that's just your opinion on what goes on in the district, so be it.
Okay, so again, maybe for the sake of the viewing public, there are varying degrees of concern among the members of this board on the district lines in general. I do want to say, though, that as a whole, we do an excellent job as a board spreading the wealth and spreading the pain when necessary. And in my experience, I have never seen an indication, I've been here 7 years now, that people ever do anything in the interest solely of their district over others. That we do our best to do what's best for the county as a whole. And if you want to talk about communities of interest, we are all communities of interest. There's very little deviation in thought or priorities or anything else when you go from Wellsville all the way up to New Hudson or whatever. So if anyone's interested in my opinion, I would be very comfortable with option 1 or option 5. Any other comments, concerns before we call the question? We have a motion on option 5. We're going to do a roll call on this. And we're missing a member.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Healy.
I don't think we should take these in the order that they're present in the packet, so I'm going to move to table this one and proceed with moving these in by order.
There's a motion to table. Is there a second? Not hearing a second, we'll proceed. We have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, we'll call the question with roll call, please.
Mr. Barnes.
On the adoption of option 5, I vote yay.
Mrs. Burdick?
Yes.
Mr. Curran?
Yes.
Mr. Demick?
Yes.
Mr. Fanton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanchett?
At this time, I'm voting no. I prefer option 1, as I had stated in the past.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Havey?
Yes.
Mr. Healy?
No.
Mr. Ricky?
No.
Mrs. Ricketts Swales?
Yes.
Mr. Rumfelt?
I'm going to vote no after hearing from the people from Ward.
Mr. Stockin?
No.
Eight ayes, 5 noes. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Seer, you weren't present. We're voting on option 5, yes or no? No. 8 ayes, 6 noes, 1 absent.
Okay, the motion is approved. Now, that being said, okay, you have your direction. That being said, kind of a tight squeeze there. And there is always the option to vote it down when it comes before the full board in the future. But what's going to happen today is administration, county attorney is going to prepare a local law for introduction at this afternoon's board meeting. It will require a 2/3 vote to consider?
It didn't require 2/3 here.
No.
I heard from the county attorney.
So it'll just be presented. Today, you have to pass the resolution for the public hearing on the local law.
It gets introduced today, and then we have a resolution coming off the floor this afternoon,
Yeah,
setting the
so it
date for
had
the public
2/3
hearing?
for consideration, yeah, for the public hearing.
Okay, and
Because it's coming off the floor, right? 2/3 for consideration because it's coming off the floor. And then you would have to, and then just be passed by majority vote to set the date for the public hearing on June 12th.
oh, could be an interesting lunch break. Mr. Fenton?
Yes, could we be clear about what happens if it comes up to a vote and it doesn't pass and we start over again?
Well, I mean, you can call it starting over, but you're back to square one, and you could, depending what develops in terms of deliberations, you could propose the same plan again or propose a different plan. So you're just not there yet.
Does that put us out of the timeline that we're
Um,
trying to meet?
Yeah, there's still time. I mean, the recommendation for June 30 was just to leave sufficient buffer in the event, there was a petition drive, any sort of judicial activity. Yeah, the sooner the better. But if you just don't have the votes and it doesn't pass this month, then you're just trying to do it as soon as you can.
Okay, now that being said, let's get down in the weeds a little bit here. If the vote stays the same, we're not going to get our 2/3 this afternoon. In that case, you've still been given the direction with the introduction and the resolution setting the day, which means it could be pre-filed for the next available board meeting, in which case it wouldn't require 2/3 and a simple majority would get it, or it would get considered either way, correct? The vote is only to consider. right? So if it doesn't get its 2/3, it simply gets kicked to the next pre-file. Am I correct?
So it
We
is,
would have to move- we'd
it's,
have to move everything.
it's the notice on the public hearing date, correct?
Yes.
So I think we're talking back here, yes, it would
But
be
we'd have to
pre-filed,
move
but we
everything.
might have to change the date of the public hearing. We'd have to make sure that date,
It would bring us into July.
it goes back to the calendaring and how much time in between each. But I think still be fine as far as the pre-file.
File, right.
Okay, so there's no indication given by what was passed here, any particular date to set the public hearing, only to bring us a resolution that sets the date. And then once the date is detailed in that resolution, it's for us to vote up or down.
But the vote this afternoon is just to set the public hearing.
Yes, but it will go down. It won't survive the 2/3.
We've known about this for 4 years, right?
No,
From the census?
we haven't.
You know, I think the way the census works is it's completed in, every 10 years. So it was completed in 2020. We don't really get the results back until almost into 2022. I think it was halfway through 2022 when we did. They go through a lot of different processes before we get detailed levels where we could be looking at this sort of data.
I guess the point is, we're just being really candid at this point. We're lacking 2 legislators, or we're lacking 1 legislator, who will not be here this afternoon. We don't have enough to get our 2/3. The reality is, if option 5 maintains its majority, which I don't see why it wouldn't, a vote against consideration off the floor this afternoon is just delaying the inevitable. And so, in my estimation, a waste of this board's time. In reality, that may happen, that it doesn't survive the 2/3, and we have to take it back up again and give admin a bunch of work to do to scramble to figure out how to make this happen. But I guess there's only one way to find out, and that's to get the local law introduced this afternoon and get a resolution for consideration off the floor, setting the date for the public hearing. Mr. Rumpfelt.
Now, I wouldn't vote against the public hearing. If we were just voting for the public hearing, because I'm interested to see if they actually show up for a public hearing, and if they don't, then, it's pretty much, but I'm not going to vote for option 5 until I hear more from the public.
Well, that's 9.
Did I hear that we can actually change the public hearing dates without creating any kind of a problem? We could move it to.
It would have to happen prior to the meeting today. Whatever date is listed on that resolution setting the date of the public hearing, I suppose you could make an amendment to it, but you can't do that until it's being considered. So we need a firm date on that resolution before we even consider taking it off the floor this afternoon. Mr. Stock.
I have no problem, even though I voted no here. I would vote yes this afternoon for the public hearing because I'm not voting on the law. I'm voting on a public hearing, so let's hear it. Let's go. So I would vote yes this afternoon on the public hearing issue.
Thank you. There's 10, but we'll see.
Mr. Chairman,
Who was that?
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, ma'am.
in addition to voting on the public hearing, the actual local law that you chose will have to be introduced today. So that is what you're voting on, is the chosen option. Because
We're
it has
not
to be
voting on,
introduced.
we're just introducing.
Right, you're introducing it, but the public hearing is going to be on that local law.
Correct.
Because you're introducing it.
Yep. Mr. Healy.
Yes, well, the whole thing seems still a little slippery here. Here we are against the whole thing with our timeline. We got to do something. When we've known about it for at least 2 years, maybe longer. I've known about it since I've known about it for the last 2 censuses that should have been redistricted. And Mr. Barnes, I'm sure, was aware of that too. So I guess, we could have had a public referendum and put it on the ballot last year. And, in the whole county, everybody could have voted on it, I believe, but, we didn't do that, so.
Pretty far down the tracks here, Mike, to start floating that concept. Jan?
I think that it is our responsibility, it has been given to us to make these decisions, so it didn't need to have a public referendum. That's what we were elected to do. It's one of our jobs when something like this comes up to make decisions. If we don't make a decision, then it will go up for public referendum. We will have no say in it. So I think we need to make some decisions, and we need to make them now. So we're not, I know we're on a time frame. We've known it for over a year, though. We've been working on it. It's not like nobody's been doing anything. So I think we need to make some decisions one way or the other, however you feel right. But we need to make a decision, and we need to get this moving.
Mr. Ricky?
Tell me if I'm out of line. Can the public hearing be on, we've eliminated number 6 and we have 1 and 5, and that gives the public a chance. If we say, hey, we're just going to give you 5 and that's it, then nobody's going to show for the public hearing, because, or am I nuts on that?
We can't do that. The public hearing is to address the specific local law. Now, I suppose we've got 2 that day, right? So we could set the date for the public hearing as the 7 p.m. one and utilize the 2 p.m. one to say whatever we want. Consider option 1 or option 5, or consider option 1, 5, and 6, or consider all 6, or only consider this one. We could do that. But I still feel in reality, the public can address the issue in the formal public hearing and say, I don't like this map. I would prefer if you did X, Y, or Z, which may be option 1, maybe option 6, maybe something we haven't even considered as a board. I just don't, to be honest, if we're being honest here, I don't anticipate a high level of public input. We didn't get it last night. We've done multiple press releases, multiple social media posts. All of our redistricting work sessions have been live streamed. We've not received a single email from the public regarding this, not one letter. And we had one member of the public last night who only gave comment because she felt bad for us. I think we need to move this forward and let the chips fall. Mr. Rumfeld.
And with that being said, it's up for permissive referendum if the public doesn't like what we do. So if there's enough people that don't like what we do here, they can do a permissive referendum. So.
Correct. Thank you.
I was just going to say the same thing, Brooke. We had no one here. I don't know that we even had anybody listening on Facebook Live. I don't know. But I think the public has had lots of opportunity. I have received no phone calls from my district addressing the changes that are happening in our district. So I'm not sure there's as much uproar and concern as maybe is being made out to be.
All right, have we beat it to death enough? We'll see what happens this afternoon. I guess if you folks would just be prepared to guide us through the timetable and next steps in the event that it doesn't get the 2/3 to set the public hearing date. Hate to ruin your lunch, but. Okay, and that, it may be beneficial, and again, not adding unnecessary workload because it does feel to me to be unnecessary. Maybe we need to compile a list of the meetings that we've held to date, maybe a list of the correspondences, email correspondences back and forth between the board, just so we're all on the same page about just how open and transparent we've been with this board on the process. Would you be up for that, County Administrator?
How soon do you want it?
It doesn't matter.
Is there any ideas on how to do more outreach? I'm out of them, quite frankly. We've created a website. We've done a PR campaign. I know it's been heavily featured on Facebook. I think the Wellsville Sun's done coverage on it. I think we've sent out, we've set up an email address. We've asked for snail mail. I've received.
Direct correspondence
Direct
to towns and
correspondence.
villages. Both supervisors, mayors, and clerks have all received correspondence by email and by hard mail.
And you've had, last night was a public hearing, wasn't required, it was for the purposes to give you more information to make a decision today on which local law might move forward to an actual public hearing. I'm out of ideas. So, and I think you've all brought it up in your district meetings too.
You got something? You waiting to load up? You got something? Mr. Sear.
Just a suggestion, thank you. Boots on the ground is your best option. I would suggest the legislators that represent the towns and villages that are potentially going to be affected by this, actually go there and talk to their constituents or hold a local town hall or some way to get the message out so we can have real opinions. But I know a lot of effort has been made to bring the public out, and it's just not successful, so I think we need to go to them.
Thank you. Okay. Good on redistricting till this afternoon? Okay. All right. As I said, nothing else on the agenda, but we do need to enter into executive session to discuss the employment history of a particular person. Thank you, Mr. Rumfeld. Seconded by Legislator Havey. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? And we're in executive session. I do want to thank you, Mr. Abdallah, for joining us again today.